Now, the government is currently assessing its response to the death of jailed Vladimir Putin critic Alexei Navalny. Lord Cameron has suggested there could be more sanctions on Russian officials, as Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy called on the government to review sanctions and undertake new efforts to target those responsible for corruption.
Yes, well, joining us now in the studio is our reporter Charlie Peters, who's been following this closely. Charlie, lots of talk of additional sanctions, crackdown on corruption. What might this mean in practice?
Well, in the last hour in Brussels, the EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, has indicated to reporters there that there could be fresh sanctions from the EU on the Russian regime, indicating in particular that that might take the form of targeting those within the institution of the penitentiary system in Russia, suggesting that there is some European awareness and security knowledge on those involved with the death of Alexei Navalny last week. That could also include the possible links of any FSB agents, that is the successor to the KGB inside Russia. We do know from reports out of Russia that FSB agents did visit Navalny in prison 2 days before his death. And there are also some reports, we haven't been able to verify, that they turned off listening devices and CCTV equipment inside that penal colony in the Baltics. So David Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, is expected to echo those calls with fresh sanctions from Britain. And the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, has also today called on Britain to review its sanctions list. And in particular, he's referred to this list called the Navalny list, the Navalny 35. And this is a collection of kleptocrats and corrupt actors within Russia that the now deceased activist said were involved in the regime, calling on the government to take a look at that avenue as well. He also went one step further, David Lammy. He said that Britain had become the money laundering capital of the world, and looked particularly towards London, saying that if we're going to clean up this situation, we also need to get rid of dirty money outside of the capital.
But Charlie, haven't we, well, not just us, haven't nations across the world in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine already done all they can in terms of seizing assets from oligarchs? And essentially what that does, of course, is it loses support for Putin. Haven't we done all we can on that front?
There's been no shortages of sanctions on Russian actors over the last 2 years in particular. Spot on, Ben. But the problem that they have as a consequence of these sanctions is that Russia is still earning plenty of money through the sale of its energy products, in particular in Germany, where, of course, there is a significant energy shortage as a consequence of the start of this war in Ukraine. But other actors inside Europe who are engaged with supporting Ukraine do point towards significant areas where there could be improvements from the international diplomatic and security establishment, in particular pointing towards the supply of arms, the $60 billion aid package currently held up in Congress in Washington, but also pointing towards the failure for European nations to ramp up their production of weaponry. If we can't prevent Russians from being killed inside Russia, then critics say we might be able to reduce Russia's violent impact outside of its own borders. At the moment, there has been a swing towards Russian military support in the last week. They achieved their first major victory in over a year in an eastern town just north of Donetsk. They had a manpower advantage, according to some reports, of 15-1 and overwhelming artillery support. The supply of arms towards the Ukrainian military, according to European officials, is going to be vital in showing support towards Ukraine. And many hope that the sad demise of leading critic Navalny may actually remove some of the blockages towards that support and could see a greater impetus on supporting the Ukrainian military.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Charlie Peters, our reporter there, bringing us the latest. There's a problem with sanctions, isn't it? Because Russia may well have few allies when it comes to the West, but it does have allies elsewhere in the world.
I remember when Roman
to whom they continue selling.
I remember when Roman Abramovich had his yachts seized all over the world, and yeah, I mean, if they can do more on that front, great, but you do wonder now with this death of Navalny, it's only going to strengthen the case, as Charlie said, for more aid to Ukraine.